Live from the Washington, D.C. area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette Devidar. The United States is number one. Yes, we are the world's most wasteful country. So what on earth are we doing? Or better said, what are we doing to Earth, the planet, our children, and essentially to ourselves? How can we move away from being a trash society? Our topic tonight, good evening, I'm Nicolette Devidar. The numbers are shocking. The World Bank estimates that our global waste production rises by 70% by 2050, unless we get our act together and change our thinking and consumption patterns fast. About 7.6 billion people currently produce about 2 billion tons of waste per year. Do you know how many zeros that is? Not your problem, you think? Yes, it is. It is a problem for each and every one of us. And among the global waste producers, the United States is the biggest municipal solid waste producer per capita worldwide. Each of us Americans produces almost a ton of garbage per year. Just ask yourself how often you have to take the trash out. Let that sink in for a moment because it's grave. But it's not just the generation of waste that we have to face, it's also how we manage it. Plastic, for example, is a major factor. In a study published by Science Advances, it was found that the two biggest waste producers of plastic worldwide are, you guessed it, the UK and the United States. Think about it. A straw within your iced coffee, a plastic bag for each item you buy, a candy wrapper, we're addicted. According to a 2017 study, more than half of the plastic we use comes from packaging for single-use items. Now, China, you would argue, is the world's top plastic producer for the global market. True, but Chinese people use very little. Many people here think plastic gets recycled. Reality is, though, that 91% of the plastic we use in the United States does not get recycled. Out of 300 million tons of plastic trash that are produced every year, 8.8 million tons end up in the oceans, according to the Natural Resources Defense Council. See the problem? Are you disgusted yet? I am. Forbes published that about 1/3 of the plastic lands either in landfill or gets burned, and the other 2/3 get exported to poor countries. Now imagine the Earth as a living organism, a body. How would you like your body being filled up with trash? So how can we change our trash production and come up with a responsible, holistic way of product innovation, healthy consumption, and reuse of materials? So let's talk trash tonight in the sense of garbage, or better said, how to get rid of it. Joining me tonight are a bunch of guests from 3 different countries. We have Lynn Kay from the Washington, D.C. area, a management consultant and educator on sustainability and the circular economy. We have Tila Ginege. He joins us from the UK. He's a senior lecturer of environmental law at the University of Bournemouth and also founder of ELF, the European Environmental Law Forum, a growing yearly conference with global participation. We've got Dr. Karen Thompson, also from the University of Bournemouth, where she's a senior lecturer in leadership strategy on business sustainability issues. We got Joseph McMullen, a researcher on environmental law and relation to the circular economy at Bournemouth. And joining us from Germany is Tobias Kredel, a futurist, packaging innovator, and founder of Pool Organization, where he helps organizations develop a measurable index for their sustainability impact. A lot of guests that are here with us, and actually for most of them it's past midnight, so let's get right to it. Thank you so much for all of you for joining us.
Hi, Nicolette.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And hi, Nicolette.
Hi. Great to have you on. Actually, I want to say something to our crew because you ended up at the wrong monitor. You were supposed to be at the other one. There we go. So great to have you all on. Thank you so much for staying awake and up for so long to be with us tonight. This is really a huge problem. I think no one, well, actually, no, that's not true. I think there's still a lot of people who are maybe not quite aware at how much trash we consume every day and produce. And I think the only thing that people probably remember is when they come home and you feel like you just took your trash out. Why do you have to take your trash out again? Because it fills up so quickly. So I want to talk first about why are we producing so much trash? I'm going to start with you, Tobias. What's the problem?
Yeah, well, packaging is of course a huge part of it, product packaging. And now there are some people who say, well, packaging is a bad thing. It's waste. It becomes trash. But in the end, you need packaging, and it's even what people are not aware of. Every little bit of product that is wasted due to bad packaging is much worse than actually having a bit more packaging waste. So concerning the carbon footprint, at least because it's much more energy consuming to produce, for example, the coffee than the packaging of the coffee.
Lynn, as an American with a focus on the circular economy, and we're going to get into the circular economy in a moment, but what's our current consumption model here in the United States? What do you say? Why are we producing so much trash?
Well, it's a variety of things. I would say the first one is really around convenience. And the second one is that we've adopted a take, make, waste model. So maybe I'll actually start there. Around the 1950s or after World War II, things really went to being, it needs to be convenient and we want to have national products. And when that happened, things really changed. It used to, so I sort of think of the problem as being back to the future, because the world didn't used to work like this, even in the United States. And in many countries, as you alluded to, it still doesn't. But after World War II, we had 3 networks for TV, and we had people like Coca-Cola who wanted to be national brands. There were things that stood in the way of that, because, for example, Coke had 2,000 bottlers that controlled all of the distribution. So they had reusable bottles, and you paid a deposit. You got your Coke in the bottle, you drank your Coke, and then you took it back, and then the bottler refilled it. Well, that caused a problem, because if you wanted to have nationwide distribution with somebody like A&P, which used to be a big grocery store chain, or with Safeway, who had stores all the way around the country, or somebody like McDonald's, you couldn't have 2,000 bottlers that each controlled their little territory. So they wanted to find a way to get rid of all of the returnable bottles and do something else. And the answer was ultimately plastic. And so the whole idea around convenience and nationality, and then later the idea that that not only were things disposable and convenient, but they just went away somewhere. That was really something that was put in consumers' minds, is you just got to dispose of it. It just got thrown away.
Okay, so let me ask you something.
The sad thing is there is no way.
But let me ask you something. So when you say what's the chicken and what's the egg, was it the companies first who came up and saying we need a more linear approach and just have things thrown away because it's more efficient? Or was it the consumer that says we just like something that we don't have to return and we just throw it away? So who was there first?
I would say it was the companies that were there first, because people didn't know what plastic packaging was at that point. They did like convenience. They knew that they didn't want to keep lugging those heavyweight bottles back to the store. So I do think that there was some, egg or chicken from the consumer. But I would say that it was more driven by the companies.
The companies? Okay, that calls for Dr. Thompson right away on this one here, because you focus on the business side for sustainability. What is your take on that? What are you seeing right now? Is there any change in the approach?
Well, many businesses are starting to try and change their approach. I'm sure on a on a global scale, nowhere near enough. I think Lynn started to put her finger on it, in that there's a big disconnect between our individual lives and all of the consequences. So, Lynn, you mentioned throwing something away. We have this notion that we can just throw it away. Well, where is away? We all live on one planet. And I think in your introduction, Nicolette, you talked about waste plastic being sent to another country.
Yeah.
Well, what happens to it there? This idea we can just ship things out of our own immediate neighborhood and somehow that is dealt with by somebody else. So I think there's a big disconnect in the sort of the way we're globally connected. Things can get moved around, and often problems become global. They become moved around the world, and our ability to actually act on it. I mean, I would imagine most of us wouldn't throw our plastic bottles into our own back garden. So I think actually one of the challenges facing businesses is actually to try and actually close some of those loops, and actually we need to deal with things on a much more local basis. That's just a start.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Tila, where does legal fit into all of this? To what extent does legal actually enable that? And to what extent do legal regulations actually limit that? And let me start you first out. Do you think the legal regulations that we have are more enablers at this point, or are they more putting a damper on it? Honestly, straight out.
Well, I think it's a mixed bag, but perhaps the way to approach it, to answer your question, is to explain what is understood from a policy, environmental policy and legal point of view. What is circular economy? So it's an economic system which is aimed at eliminating waste. So you're absolutely right when you started talking about waste and the problem. So it's eliminating waste and the continual use of resources. So this circular system, called the circular economy, employs reuse, sharing, repair, refurbishment, remanufacture, recycling to create a closed loop. The problem that we have is that it's centered on waste management. Tobias mentioned this about packaging waste. Lynn was about businesses getting involved in this. So from a European and a UK point of view, we have targets for waste management for different types of products. And we've had these laws since 1975.
But the same law since 1975, they need an overhaul.
They have in 2008, and now since about 11th of March, the European Union has just unveiled a circular economy plan 2.0, which is about trying to halve the municipal waste laws to deal with municipal waste, reducing it, packaging waste, circular electronics, repair, creating a zero waste society, a right to repair. But I think one of the biggest problems that we have is it's about our unsustainable consumption. And you asked the question, are the laws working? Well, the quick answer is obviously it's not. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this terrible mess in UK and Europe. Plastic is a huge problem. And we were talking earlier, and Joseph McMullen has a rather important point to make on that. Sorry,
Okay, Joseph, why don't you go ahead?
It's thrown straight into the fire. Thank you. Building from what Dr. Thompson was saying, is there seems to be this idea perpetuated that we can send our garbage and our trash somewhere else. And some of this ideology centers around burning. That's just as much of a problem as burying or putting it in the sea. You said in the introduction, how would you feel if you had trash in your body? Unfortunately, America, the world, the truth is you have trash in your body.
Yes, we do. That's correct.
Breathing it in. You're eating it, you're drinking it, you're living it. You have it in your body.
We're breathing it too.
You are absolutely breathing it. In ambient air all around us, every single one of us is breathing soot particles, dust particles, plastics. It's a huge problem. Building on what Lynn said, I really appreciate your point there about accessibility and convenience. It's easy for us as consumers to access things and products that are not sustainable. That's not necessarily our fault. I'm not saying it's not our fault at all, but not to bring a prop, but earlier I picked up this bottle of lemonade. That's 79 pence. It's about $1 in the US, I think. It's a plastic bottle. Horrendous for the environment. If you were to ask me how much that bottle of lemonade costs in a glass bottle or a recycled bottle, the answer is I don't know, because that's not available to me. When I go to the shop, that same product is not available in a renewable or a sustainable packaging. So something needs to be done before the consumer has the opportunity to buy. We should have more access to sustainable products.
Okay, that's great. That calls for Tobias to come in, definitely. So,
Yeah,
in terms of how do we actually create value? I think that's really where we need to start. How do we create value? Where is value created in the entire process? And how do we make better offerings in that respect than accessible by the consumer? In other words, how do we get all the trash off the shelf?
Yeah, I mean, it really starts where the products are thought up. So convenience food, for example, I mean, this is something that really creates a lot of trash, and there has been, I guess, market research, and people said, okay, there's a share of consumers who are ready to pay a premium for convenience food that they can easily do. Then you have also demographic things. You have singles. It's not like housewife cooks the food and the husband comes back home like it might have been in the 50s of the last century. Today you have single households, and they don't have a lot of time, and they need convenience foods to function in this in this society that we live in. And
let's go through the value chain, so to speak, in terms of when you start innovating. I mean, you come from the packaging industry. So how are decisions made right now in terms of what to package a product in before it gets on the market, Tobias?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of influence, of course, is money. So people are looking for cheap stuff, and then they are looking at price positionings, and so throughout the whole chain, money is quite often the most important value for everybody. Everybody is also measured according to the money they earn, the money they save. For example, when there's a saving product, and they reduce the material strength of the lemonade bottle that Joseph just had, until Joseph can to tweak it with his bare hands, because it's so thin in the end.
You made a slide for us. Let's see if we can pull it up. Slide 1, and then maybe you can walk us through.
Yeah,
which is
so
a product
you have
value chain.
The whole chain.
Yeah,
the whole
and
chain
the main thing is really talk about the actual impact, like what are the issues with it, the bottom line there that you got. So new product development, where it starts. Can you walk us through?
Yes, of course. So this is the value chain for an typical FMCG product that also gets packaged. So it starts with the new, and I wrote new in brackets, product development, because many products are not new. So they are just Me Too products, and they are devised to be a cash cow in the end. So who needs two colas, for example? Who needs two cola brands that compete against each other? It's only that different companies want a share of the cake in the end, of the consumer's money. So this is how this all is put up in the end. And the opposite, of course, the direct opposite, is something that is a human-centered and really valuable innovation. And so I'm not the person who says that everything that we are creating, all the products are useless, but in our machinery, we are indeed creating a lot of products that are useless, and that are heavily overpacked, and that should be maybe using less resources. So when you come to the second part, production and resources, we have a lot of cheap junk still and fashion stuff. So yeah, for example, when you're looking at clothing, it's basically produced just for the next season, and then it's basically produced to be thrown away because people want to sell more.
Yeah.
And this is and then you have this in many areas. Of course, the exact opposite is like a long-lasting quality with a guarantee. You get, as you said, you get stuff repaired, maybe even, or it really lasts a human lifetime. That's in the end how production should be in the end. And then, of course, using resources that are regrowing or that at least are not bad for the environment.
And then it goes to retail, logistics, and storage. So obviously there are some other issues with that. I want to talk a little bit more about promotion and advertising, because I think that plays a big role in the whole thing as well. Can you walk us through that point?
And I wanted to mention this concept of trash in your mind that is created through advertising, because, for example, these two cola brands or whoever is just competing for market shares, two products that are not really different, but maybe even are referring to each other in their advertising. This is something that really economic battles are fought in our minds, and this is not something that where a value for us is created. So what Jeff Hammerbacher once said, the former data manager of Facebook, he once said, "The best minds of my generation are thinking about how to make people click ads, and that sucks." And that's the truth, advertising, it became more harassing and more of a nuisance. Today, I just want to research something on the internet and, it jumps into my face, and then I have to find the little button where I can get rid of it. It's advertising creates stress, and it creates basically useless stuff in our minds just to sell products that we don't need.
And advertising invented actually creating the product need in the first place.
Pardon?
The product need. Advertising created the product need in the first place.
It creates a need, and it also creates illusions. So, coming back to the cola brands, it's a fact that people think that a certain brand tastes better because they have all this advertising stuff in their minds. And I have a glass where I've got this brand on it, because I know that stuff that I put in there tastes a little better because all of these advertising billions that they have spent. So.
Sorry, Nicolette, can I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
And ask a question, because I'm afraid, Tobias, what you're talking about is the linear process.
Yes, but that's what we're having. That's what we're having right now. We're still in a linear world, and we're moving over to a different one.
But surely, how? Perhaps the question that needs to be asked is, how can we move?
We are going that we're getting there, Tilak. You're jumping ahead of the gun here. We're getting there.
I'm being like one of my students.
Yes, because I want to make sure our viewers understand the linear model that we have right now, which is still prevalent, and what are kind of the components to it, so we become more aware of that. And then as the next one, I actually wanted to call on Lynn and ask her, how do you see the shift from the linear to the circular economy?
Well, it's happening. It's happening more slowly than many people would like. But just to follow on what Tobias said, I can give you a number of examples where organizations are creating reusable packaging and working with major brands to implement that packaging. So 3 companies that are doing that. One of them is called Algramo. They are out of Chile, and they've been working with Unilever and some other major brands. They create plastic packaging for things like laundry detergent and dog food that actually has a little chip embedded in it. And so you get the reusable packaging, you take it and fill it up with whatever material it is, whatever product you're buying. And then there's an app that goes with it that knows that you went and filled it up, and it keeps track of that. And so rather than having throwaway bottles, They even have little carts that will come outside your door and you can run out and go fill up your laundry detergent and dog food and other bulk products. So that's one way that things are being made circular. In the United States, there's a company named Loop that's doing something quite similar to that. And Tom Zaki, who is the CEO of Loop's theory is that you sort of can't change consumers. So you have to do something that makes consumers want to have this reusable package. So they've been working with designers to try to make drop dead gorgeous packages that you would rather buy than what else would otherwise be on the shelf, and then that's also reusable.
Right, so that's the incentivizing using packaging that may not look as nice, but you can actually, it's incentivized so you return it.
Oh, it looks beautiful. The packaging looks much nicer than the plastic equivalent that you would normally get at the store. This is often metal or some other material. And they're doing the same theory as the old milkman who would deliver things to your door. You would empty it and you'd reuse it. So there actually are Loop bags that you can return things in, and they have sanitizing facilities, and then they return them back to the manufacturers to be refilled. So that's one of the ways that the environment is becoming, or the economy is becoming more circular. There are also others. One of the number one things that goes into municipal waste is food. And so there are a number of municipalities in the United States, and I believe this is also quite true in Europe and the UK, where you separate out your food waste and it goes to a food waste processing facility where it turns into compost and then is used as fertilizer rather than man-made fertilizer. So that's another way that the process is becoming more circular. But the real key is to look at it as a system from a very high level. So if you look at something like the food system, like textiles, like personal mobility, i.e. transportation, and you take how the materials are originally extracted that go into it, you look at how those products are produced, you look at how they're used and what the end of life is, and then you get the entire consortium of all those organizations together to work on how do we create something that keeps materials working and that eliminates waste at every single part of the process.
So let me ask you something. Actually, there's so much to talk about. One thing at a time here. Dr. Thompson, I want to ask you in terms of, so what Lynn just described as the circular economy, that means that companies have to rethink totally different in how they bring the product to market and actually have to make the packaging and the reuse of the material as part of the process and where it's going to go afterwards. How many companies that you've worked with are actually doing this?
Well, there's a number of different ways you can tackle this problem, and one can be about well, let's take an example of carpet, for example. One of the best things to make new carpet from is carpet. So there have been companies that have set up, and you never actually buy the carpet from them. So you will effectively, you're redefining what the product is from being a product that is consumed by the consumer to being something where you're actually receiving a service. So you would buy the carpet from them, you would use it until the end of its life, and then they would then come and collect it and take it back in and remake that into new carpet. So that's one way in which companies can themselves develop a more a circular approach to their actual products around taking ownership of it and retaining ownership. Other models are around sometimes in this country, I expect you've got them in America, actual zero waste outlets, where they actually completely reduce all the packaging in store and you bring your own containers and fill them up and take them away. So that's another model. Again, cars, I believe many of the car manufacturers these days are actually rethinking the whole car ownership. I mean, we already do some of this with leasing cars, but actually if you make something to be disposable, that is, say, fueling this the linear economy. But if you actually make it that you never actually buy something, but you're simply using the service that it provides you, it fundamentally changes the way you think about products. You're not actually creating a product to be consumed. You're providing a service that people will buy into. There are some well-known clothing manufacturers who you buy the product from them and they will repair it ad infinitum. So you never actually own it yourself. So I think this idea of personal ownership is being challenged in various types of industries. We're seeing this, especially where we have products sitting around our homes, where they're sitting there and 99% of the time they're not used. So the idea that we have more of a communal ownership maybe. I know my cousin, for example, they own the village cider press. So when people have surplus apples, they will bring them and they will press them, and you don't need every household in the village to have a cider press. So there's ways in which we've done these things over the centuries, and we need to reinvent some of these things about keeping things in use much more.
I agree. I actually used to have a business a while ago and offered reusable cosmetics where you could refill it. And there was a model in how you could refill the bottles and things like that. But that also brings up another question. I want to ask Joseph and Tilak on this one. So when you have, for example, refill models where you bring bottles back for refill and things like that, what are the legal ramifications that need to be considered with that? Because we live in a very a very legal society, so to speak. There's a lot of liability. That's a huge issue here in the US, probably even more so than in the UK or in the rest of Europe. So what are some of the legal things that you may have run into in your work or in your research that really limit that kind of model of reusing containers and bottles and things like that, or shift the responsibility to the consumer?
You've got me there, I have to be honest, because in Britain we are moving towards when we joined the European Union, there were many models of recycling processes or reuse processes that existed, and for whatever reason we moved away from that and we went into this linear economic model, and it's only recently that we're starting to think about it. But to date, I can actually tell you there is no process by which, if I buy a bottle of Coke, if I buy a glass bottle, if I buy a bottle of beer or can, there is no manufacturer or supermarket where I can go and drop this bottle over to them, get some money back. Now, I believe that in Denmark and in Germany, if I'm not mistaken, Tobias, you have these models in existence.
Deposit models. Yeah, definitely.
Now, sorry, Lynn, I'm not deflecting the so you have those. The reason I'm saying this is it's not a problem. It's not an issue that has propped up right now. Yes, it can become a problem if, for example, people get injured, the product breaks. Again, we've just lost that culture of recycling and having deposit schemes. So if you return something, you get some money back, 25 pence back on the bottle that you give back. I suspect that there is no law right now. There are plans to put those laws in place. There was a policy document created by one of the previous Prime Minister, Theresa May, and it was called the 25-year Environment Plan. And in that, they're proposing to put these into place. And it is about changing attitudes and behavior. But one of the things that I feel very strongly about is it's all about pushing it onto the consumer. And I think that there should be more incentives. And I'm sorry, to answer your question, we don't have that problem in Britain. In Germany and Denmark, you have these recycling processes and return and deposit processes, which are working perfectly.
Yeah, and I actually saw a study because I pulled that out. So when Germany has incentivized the bottle return, 98% of those bottles and products are actually being returned. That's a stunningly high number.
Yes, maybe I can say something about that. It's even so that you have some also of course have some poor people in Germany, and they very often take these deposit bottles and collect them and then bring them back, and that's a little earning for them, because many people are too lazy, or maybe if they're just going out and drinking a beer or so, then they just put it beside the trash bin because they know that the people will come and collect them and then they bring them back. So there's even a culture evolved around that for people collecting those.
Yeah, and it's
that
very
used to happen in the
easy.
United States too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
But
just
what I wanted to say about liability, that it's actually not so easy. When you have these deposit systems, of course, then you have a producer who's liable for it. But if everybody comes with their jar and then refills something, then there's a problem. At least from a very a strict legal point of view, because currently it's even a problem if there's a little bit of oil inside your cardboard that might migrate into your food or whatever after months or so. So very strict. And I mean, if I come just with some jar and maybe there's even something in there that is, then that's not hygienic. It's not.
But I want to clarify actually something also for you at home. So those systems in Germany, for example, it's really super easy to return the bottles, because we just have these machines and you go into the stores and you literally just dump them in, and then you get like your little ticket and you go to the cash register and you get the money out. It's very easy to use, right, Tobias?
That's true, yeah. And they are getting better and faster. So I mean, with the technology, though, you can really put them in if they're new ones and good ones.
Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt, but what I wonder here when you're talking about liability is, do you find, or do you think it's possible that you're opening yourselves up to the possibility that people who are perhaps homeless or don't have very much money may, I don't know, break into somebody's grounds, trespass on their land, go through their bins, try and find recyclables that they can then deposit? If 98% of people are returning their bottles, chances are there's not a lot lying around on the street. So is there the potential for liabilities for trespass and criminal damage of people entering your property to try and find recyclables to hand in for money?
I think yeah, go ahead, Tobias.
I never heard about that.
Me neither.
So I mean, I know that there are people trespassing. I wouldn't call it trespassing, but sometimes people enter the area of a house and then go through the outside bin that basically people put their trash, and then they go through the trash to find some of those bottles, but they're not trespassing into private property where anybody would care.
I mean, then that's absolutely, there's no way that I'm against the deposit model. I think it's a fantastic idea, and in my research over the last few days especially, I was disgusted to see that in 2021 this is something that seems to be a new proposition in the United Kingdom. But from a purely legal perspective and the potential for opening yourselves up to liability, I think there is a real possibility that you will have people who go through your rubbish. Personally, if somebody goes through my rubbish, am I comfortable with that? Yeah. If the result is that they might find some recyclables that I overlooked, great. The worst that they're going to see is probably an unholy amount of chocolate wrappers that I really should not be eating so much of.
Plastic or aluminium?
Sorry?
For the chocolate wrappers, plastic or aluminum?
Oh, paper, absolutely.
But the interesting thing also in Germany is, and I think Tilak mentioned that, is that you also take back stuff that is not refilled, but afterwards recycled. So it's basically and that's even higher. So to bring back the one-time bottles so that they are properly recycled, there's an even higher deposit onto them.
Yeah.
So maybe a way to look at the liability is around extended producer liability and right to repair. Because Tilak, I think you were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
You'd explain a little bit more about the right to repair, Lynn, because I want to make sure that our viewers also understand what that is. Break it down for us.
Okay, so right to repair, and Tilak, please jump in here because you probably know more about this than I do. Right to repair is the idea that if you buy a product, you ought to have the ability to actually repair it. It's come out of primarily electronics and the idea that you should be able to repair a smartphone or a computer or something like that. It's in some cases extending beyond that, where the idea is that as a general rule, you ought to have the ability, if you buy something that has components, et cetera, to be able to take it apart and fix it.
Tilak, you got something to add?
Yeah, Lynn, this is absolutely new. I think in the States you're a little bit ahead of us in that perspective. This is now in place in something called the Waste Circular Economy Amendment Regulations 2020 in the UK. In the European Union, this is now a component of the EU Circular Economy Plan 2.0, where they precisely are talking about products that will be repaired by the manufacturer. So it absolutely, so it extends, and it's about extending the guarantees, but it's now going to be enshrined not just in policy but in law, which is again, see, this right to repair for products, smartphones, computers will come into place from 2021. The interesting aspect is the recycling of plastic, halving of municipal waste, packaging waste, electronic waste initiatives. All of these, the truth is, batteries, targeted food waste. Europe, with all the laws in place, are still, certain countries are far ahead of others. This is the problem I was saying earlier. These laws are really good, but some countries like Germany, Northern European countries are much better. Germany, Holland, the Netherlands, Scandinavia, Belgium, whereas some of the Southern Europeans are not so good, and Britain sort of mixed bag, and we're just catching up. And a lot of times in the US, the rest of the world tends to look at US and say, okay, people in the US are not progressive, but actually you do have states that are far more progressive. You're like, in fact, you're like the European Union. There are states that are so far ahead, streaking ahead in innovation, and there are some who are catching up. But there are such good practices, and this is one thing that struck me very interestingly, is that not enough is coming out of the States of the good practices that are coming, that are working, that would be helping the rest of the world to also take or to share those or to understand those experiences and learn from them.
Okay, hang on. I want to ask Lynn here. So who are the front runners on actually being innovative states, and who are the laggers? You got some state names for us? Identify them.
Sure. So probably California is the furthest. California, Massachusetts, pretty much all of the states on the West Coast. So I should also say that Oregon and Washington tend to be ahead. And then interestingly, New England is quite good. And then there's some states in the Midwest, like Wisconsin, that tend to be good. And then it also even varies by city. So cities like Chicago and New York. So if it's a major city, so even like Atlanta is quite progressive, even though they're in Georgia, which would normally not be considered so progressive. So it very much depends by region, but the states tend to be on the coast. And then there's a group like Wisconsin and Minnesota that are quite good. And the ones that aren't, you can probably guess. It tends to be some of the more southern states, some of the states in the Southwest that aren't as good. But even there, it sort of depends on what area of sustainability and circular economy you're talking about. As an example, you would think Texas would be bad, but they're the #1 producer of wind energy in the United States. So even there, it depends based on, what part of sustainability and circular economy you're talking about.
Now, I want to talk about one more thing that we haven't talked about yet. So the way we see it, there are several issues. So there is the consumption problem that consumers just keep consuming because it's convenient and because they suggest that they need that, or otherwise they're not gonna be able to survive if they don't buy product X. You have companies that still are very bottom line driven, and they need to pump out a product whether it's meaningful or not. But the fact of the matter is there needs to be a revenue, and therefore hence we just take it out to have the lowest hanging fruit and take sort of the cash cow approach. We have some of the business models. We talked a little bit about the legal ramifications, but we haven't talked about the understanding of value and quality by today's generation. And I think actually that does play a role in that, because if you look at the fashion mountains, if you ask most people what quality is today, I think most of us, or a lot of us, probably have lost that idea to identify what actually is quality. So who wants to take a stab at this one? Where's the quality aspect?
I'd love to start, if that's okay.
Go.
I think from a consumer perspective, a lot of the time quality is seemingly directly related to price. The more you pay, surely the higher quality the product is.
But is that true? I question that, because I don't think it is.
Absolutely not.
Exactly.
No way. There's no, I don't think there's any merit to that whatsoever, but I do think that even if you have an acknowledgement that there is no merit to that, the advertising and the social pressures of having the newest something phone, the newest designer outfit, you have an inherent small little voice in the back of your head that says, you paid a lot of money for this, it's good.
Okay, who wants to go next?
So I'll go next, in that one of the things I do is I'm part of the teaching staff for the circular economy class at Harvard's executive ed program, which means that we have a whole bunch of people. They range quite widely in age, but it's pretty much all graduate students, and they have careers by and large. So our median age is probably maybe 35 or 30. And I've been amazed. Now, granted, they're taking circular economy and they're generally in the sustainability program, so it's not your average person. But I do think that quality and durability, the fact that it's not impacting the environment too negatively, does actually come into play in their minds. And they do care about that sort of stuff. Many of them are actually innovating and either working for startups or entrepreneurs themselves that are coming up with solutions.
But those are younger generations generally?
Yes.
That's what I thought. Because there is more of an incentive and more of an understanding in terms of that we have to think more interconnected and more holistic and start seeing like how the dots play a role and what's the impact of it. Now, Tobias, you have developed a wheel, as I recall, that kind of takes people in the innovation process as well as possibly the consumer through in terms of what are all the different elements to that. Can you give us a very brief rundown in what elements there are to be considered?
You mean from the packaging, for packaging?
Yeah, in terms of when I'm a consumer, I'm standing in front of the shelf, for example, and I want to see what's the footprint of a product. What do I all have to think about?
You see when you look at the wheel, then there are different setups. So there's one setup, for example, for the sustainability wheel that looks at packaging sustainability, and I think I will take that one now. So this measuring, just measuring the CO2 footprint is not really a good way, and this is more like a system for taxation. And somebody already said that it's about telling people you are bad because you have too much of this. But this doesn't help to develop the right products, and this is where the wheel comes in. So this is giving a holistic evaluation of the product, where it is good and where it is not good. So, for example, one thing that is very important in the logistic chain is lightness, so that the product is not too heavy. And also, when you look at deposits, for example, when you have glass bottles and you have them as a deposit, then you need to know that you have to ship them through the whole of the USA, probably. And this is also a factor. And then the volume also. So if you have a high volume and empty bottles that you ship around, then you're shipping air in the end. So this is also not very sustainable. But you might need that. You need such a durable protection. And for example, packing a liquid, there's nothing better than glass, because it's really neutral. It's an environmentally neutral material that also doesn't migrate into your product. So plastic bottles, they migrate. So you have plastics in your drink in the end. And if you have a water in a plastic bottle and you let it, let it on the shelf for 1 year and then you drink it, then you even taste the plastic. And then, for example, of course, recyclability, reusability, these are also factors, and et cetera, et cetera. Packaging is a very very wide area.
So how can we start, because we have about 6 minutes left, so I want to talk in those last 6 minutes a little bit about how can we change our thinking towards thinking more interconnectedly. And I want our consumers, or our viewers, us basically, so when we're consumers, when we go grocery shopping, what can we take away to think about next time we pack something in the basket? So let's start first in how we can change the thinking. We talked a little bit about incentivizing. We talked a little bit about how to, what organizations can do to kind of make different or better products available on the shelf. Lynn, you mentioned a little bit about, the courses you design, so there is more of a holistic approach, but on a broader scale, how can we change our thinking on this?
A lot of it is about asking more challenging questions. I mean, I think many of us in the room are educators, and my fundamental belief is it does come down to education. Quite often the obvious answers aren't always necessarily the best ones, and there are very few just black and white things. I mean, I'm very keen to really challenge the myth that to be sustainable is always going to cost more money. There are plenty of simple examples where it actually can reduce cost, so it's a win-win. And I think actually trying to persuade somebody they don't want something is never going to work. So I think we need to start really get right back to the basics about challenging the thinking. What is it we're buying? Where's it coming from? How's it got there? I mean, even renewable energy, and on balance, that probably is the way to go at the minute. But there is also a big downside with how some of the things are mined, for example. So I think we've just got to carry on in all aspects of our lives, working much, much harder at some of these decisions.
I think if I can...
Sorry, Tilak, could I jump on really quickly?
Yeah, sure, go.
Just going straight from what Karen's saying there about it's not black and white. Actually, my maybe radical view is it can be black and white. And you asked what we can do to change the thinking. My suggestion is you don't change the thinking, you remove the thinking. Don't give consumers the choice between plastic and glass. Put a legal requirement for all bottles to be bottled in glass. Remove the plastics entirely. Whether the cost should be footed by the supplier. If they don't want to foot the cost of supplying a glass bottle, get into a different business.
But isn't that a little bit over-regulating the markets?
But what's the result if we don't do that? The result is, we're living on a planet that we're using 3 times as many resources as we actually have. So soft regulation isn't working. Over-regulation may be the only way. And it may be we get to the point where we are faced with over-regulation or complete planet destruction.
Tilak, what's your take on this one?
I think that I would take a mixture of what Joe is saying along with taxation. So green taxes, where if your product is we should have labeling of products where we not only tell the consumer what the ingredients are, but also what the environment footprint is in terms of the fact that it can be recycled that much better, easily. And so you're looking at a product and going, I'm far more prepared to drink this bottle of ginger beer because it's out of glass and it's got a level of recyclability, and I'm interested in purchasing that product. If it's slightly more expensive, I'm prepared to take that step because, and this is also where Tobias packaging would come in, and advertising and marketing would come in to change the mentality, because up to now marketing and advertising has always been getting us to buy products. Well, what about getting us to buy products that, okay, I could live without ginger beer, but I like it. But if I go for the ones that are only the non-plastic, and I'm told this one is going to have much less impact on the environment. So you're giving me a middle path. So so Joe, as a strict legal scholar, is saying, let's give them no choice. I'm saying, let's steer them in the right direction.
Take the middle way. Lynn, any last words for you on this one? Got to be quick.
Well, I would just say, I think education. So I guess I'm in there with Dr. Thompson. I think education makes a difference. If people understand the impacts of what's happening, they won't necessarily always make a great choice, but they're going to make better choices.
Tobias?
Yeah, I think the problem is that quite often we do not know which packaging really is the most sustainable one. So what we first need is an honest discussion on that, and then what we then need, in my opinion, is like a trustworthy orientation system also for the consumer. So that just like what Tilak said, so that you know which ones you can choose, that you are drawn towards the right ones. Because currently it's just chaos and lobbyism. So people have no idea which ones are the right choices.
So education,
and we want the amount of environmental damage to be reflected in the price. If something is causing a massive pollution problem, then the cost of dealing with that needs to be factored into the price.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yes. Thank you so much for all of you for coming on. It was great information, great discussion. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you listen carefully. There really is a lot we as consumers actually can do about reducing the waste, and I think we all have a responsibility to do so. So next week you have a wonderful Easter weekend, and we'll see you the week after with a hot topic. Have a good night.